I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who tells this story. My name is Julia, and until that day, I believed in perfect love, perfect trust, and perfect friendships. I grew up dreaming about my wedding day the way some girls dream about fame or adventure. To me, love was everything. And I truly thought I had it all figured out. He seemed tired whenever we met to talk about final plans. The sun was shining. My wedding dress was ready for the final fitting. He told me he couldn't go through with the wedding. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I asked him why, over and over, my voice breaking. My parents tried to comfort me, but I could see the hurt in their eyes too. Others acted like it was somehow my fault for not seeing what was right in front of me. But the truth was, I couldn't see it because I didn't want to. I loved them both too much to ever imagine they could do this to me. That love had blinded me completely. They had loved Daniel like a son. Friends came by with flowers and sad faces, but their words felt empty. And every morning, reality hit me again, cold and sharp. The wedding invitation sat unopened in the living room. The dress hung silently in my closet, waiting for a day that would never come. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of what I had lost. At night, I lay awake, replaying every moment in my head. Every laugh we had shared, every promise he made to me, every secret I told Lily. It felt like they had stolen not just my wedding, but my whole past. The memories felt poison now, as if nothing had ever been real. Then he said something that will stay with me forever. "I'm sorry, Julia, but I love Lily." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like my chest had caved in. But mostly, I hated myself. How could I have been so foolish? So blind? Those questions haunted me every second. I felt like my heart had been ripped out, and nothing was left but emptiness. I remember hearing my own voice asking if he was joking, if this was some kind of cruel test. I didn't know who I was without Daniel. I didn't know how to live without the friend I had trusted all my life. All I knew was that the life I had imagined was gone forever, and I had no idea what would come next. But he wasn't joking. My best friend and my fiancé had betrayed me in the worst way possible. I was waiting for Daniel at a little cafe where we were supposed to meet and go over the last guest list. He didn't show up. He didn't answer his phone. I called Lily, hoping maybe she knew where he was. She didn't answer either. For hours, I sat there, my coffee going cold, telling myself there must be a good reason. But the sinking feeling in my stomach wouldn't leave me alone. I thought maybe it was just nerves. After all, weddings can be stressful, and I believed our love could survive anything. Lily, too, seemed a little off. She would disappear for hours, saying she was helping me but never really explaining what she had been doing. I still didn't see the truth. I still thought she was my best friend, and he was my soulmate. I had known my fiancé, Daniel, since we were 16. We met in high school, in the hallway between classes, when he offered to carry my books after I dropped them. From that small moment, we built something I thought was unbreakable. She didn't even have the courage to face me in person. She sent me a message, saying she didn't plan it, that love just happened, and she was sorry. Sorry. That was all she had to say after destroying everything I had built with Daniel for so many years. I kept reading that message over and over, hoping it would change, hoping she'd say it was a lie. But it wasn't. We had the same plans, the same silly jokes, and even the same dream of buying a little house by the lake. We were going to get married in the same small town where we had fallen in love. It felt like life was giving me the exact story I had always wanted. Right beside me through all those years was my best friend, Lily. We met even earlier than I met Daniel. Lily and I were friends since we were 12. She was the loud one, the funny one, the girl everyone noticed first. Daniel seemed nervous but happy. Lily was excited, running around with me from flower shops to cake tastings. My mother warned me once, very gently, that sometimes people can hide jealousy behind smiles. I laughed it off. How could Lily ever be jealous? She was beautiful, confident, and had her own boyfriend. I trusted her more than anyone. I told her everything, from silly worries about the weather on my wedding day to my most private doubts. Looking back now, I realize how blind I was, but at the time, it felt impossible to question her. I always thought of her as the sister I never had. She was there for every birthday, every late-night phone call, and every heartbreak I had before Daniel. She helped me pick out my prom dress. She even came with me to buy the wedding dress I had always imagined wearing. When I said yes to Daniel's proposal, she cried almost as hard as I did. Or at least, that's what I thought. In those days before the wedding, my heart was so full I thought it might burst. 2 weeks before the wedding, something started to feel different, but I didn't understand what it was. Daniel seemed distracted. He missed a few calls. Then, one afternoon, everything crashed. I remember the day clearly. That night, Daniel finally called. His voice was quiet, almost empty. The next day, Lily confirmed it. In the days that followed, I felt like I was living someone else's life. People around town began to talk. Some looked at me with pity. Every morning, I woke up with the hope that it was all just a nightmare. For a while, I hated them both so deeply it scared me. That was the day my perfect dream shattered. The day Julia, the girl who believed in fairy tales, began to disappear. For days after the truth came out, I barely left my room. The world outside my window felt too loud, too bright, too alive for someone who felt so completely broken inside. My phone kept buzzing with messages I couldn't bring myself to read, and when someone knocked on my door, I stayed silent, hoping they would just go away. My mother sat beside me on the edge of my bed, gently telling me to eat, to rest, to go outside for fresh air. Was I ever truly loved by either of them? The not knowing hurt as much as the betrayal itself. I wondered if there had been signs that I missed, small moments when they exchanged a look or a smile that wasn't meant for me. I thought about every conversation I had with Lily, every time she reassured me that Daniel adored me. I imagined confronting them, screaming at them for what they had done, demanding answers they probably wouldn't give. The house by the lake we planned, the honeymoon I had dreamed about, the simple idea of growing old together, all of it was gone. But even that idea felt impossible. My roots were too deep, my memories too heavy. So, I stayed, waking up every day to face the same emptiness. The days blurred together, marked only by the ache in my chest and the questions I couldn't answer. In its place was a darkness I didn't know how to escape. I didn't know who I was without Daniel. I didn't know who I could trust after Lily. It felt like they had taken not just my present, but my past and my future too. But whenever I pictured it, my anger dissolved into exhaustion and sadness. I was too tired to fight, too broken to shout. I didn't know that out of the deepest part of my despair, something new would begin. At that time, all I knew was pain, raw, sharp, and endless. But even in that darkness, a tiny part of me still hoped that somehow, someday, I could find a way to breathe again. Instead, I sat alone with my thoughts, replaying the same story of betrayal until it became a part of who I was. My reflection in the mirror didn't look like me anymore. My eyes seemed dull, my face thinner, and my smile was gone. Were those lies? Or had she convinced herself they were true? The weight of those thoughts was crushing, and no matter how tired I was, sleep wouldn't come. I lay awake listening to the silence, hearing only the sound of my own broken heart. My father, usually so strong, looked lost and angry, as if he couldn't understand how his daughter could be hurt like this. The sun still rose every morning, the shops on my street still opened, and people still hurried past my window, laughing and talking about ordinary things. Watching them made me feel even more alone, like I was trapped behind invisible glass, unable to reach the life everyone else seemed to have. Friends called, some offering comfort, others asking what had happened as if they wanted to hear the story of my pain. Their words felt empty, and sometimes cruel, even when they meant well. "You're strong," they'd say, "or you'll find someone better," but those words felt like stones dropping into a bottomless well. I wasn't strong. I wasn't ready to think about someone else. I just wanted my old life back, and I knew I could never have it. Their love meant everything to me, but in those days, it also reminded me of what I had lost, the belief that love was unbreakable. I remembered all the moments I defended Lily when someone said she could be selfish, and all the times I brushed off Daniel's silence or distant looks. I thought about how excited I had been to show Lily my wedding dress, how I laughed when she teased me about crying at the altar. Those memories hurt more than anything because they were wrapped in love I had believed was real. Now, they felt poisoned, like sharp glass hidden in something soft. I couldn't look them in the eyes without seeing their disappointment, their helplessness. They wanted to fix what couldn't be fixed, and I hated that I had become someone they had to pity. Even breathing felt heavy, like every breath reminded me that I was still here while the life I had built had vanished overnight. I remember lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, my mind playing the same scenes again and again until they felt like torture. Daniel's voice saying he loved Lily, the message Lily sent me, the plans I had so carefully made falling apart in my mind. I couldn't escape the memories, no matter how hard I tried. They followed me into every moment, reminding me of my own blindness and the deep cut of betrayal. Some mornings, I would wake up forgetting for a second what had happened. And then the memory would crash over me like cold water, stealing my breath and pushing me back into that pit of pain. I felt humiliated, not just because the man I loved had left me, but because it had been for my best friend. The person I had trusted with every part of my heart. The shame was its own kind of pain, sharp and constant, whispering in my ear that everyone must think I was foolish, that everyone must be laughing behind my back. Even when no one was around, the shame burned inside me, making it hard to look at myself in the mirror. Family tried to help, but their worry only made me feel worse. At night, my mind became my worst enemy. The questions circled endlessly. When did it start? How long had they been lying to me? The world outside kept moving, as if nothing had happened. I blamed myself more than anyone else. I hated how blind I had been, how easily I trusted them both. Some days, the anger burned hotter than the pain. Even the future, something I had always seen so clearly, had turned into a blank wall. In the middle of all that pain, there were moments when I thought about running away, leaving everything behind to start over where no one knew my story. I didn't know then that something unexpected was waiting for me. It took weeks before I could even gather enough strength to step outside my house, and even then, it felt like I was walking through a world I no longer belonged to. I remember standing at the door, keys in my hand, breathing in slowly as if the air outside might sting. It was filled with half-finished stories, notes, and random thoughts I had scribbled down over the years. I hadn't written anything in so long, but as I flipped through the pages, I felt something stir inside me. That evening, I sat by the window with a pen in my hand, staring at the blank page. My hand shook at first, but I started to write anyway. Not about Daniel and Lily, not yet. In them, I poured out every word I had kept inside, my anger, my disappointment, my sorrow, and even the love that still lingered in spite of everything. The woman staring back at me wasn't weak, she was surviving. I didn't know what it would look like, but I knew I wanted to take back my life. I had been stuck in the shadow of what they had done for too long. It was time to step into the light again, even if it scared me. And so, quietly, stubbornly, I promised myself, this story isn't going to end with their betrayal. It's going to end on my terms. She was learning that love could break, that trust could be stolen, but that even then, life could go on. And slowly, the question I asked myself each morning changed. It wasn't "why did they do this to me?" anymore, it was "what am I going to do now?" When I finished, I folded the letters and tucked them away in the back of the drawer. They weren't for them, they were for me, a way to say what needed to be said without giving them another chance to hurt me. Instead, I wrote about the view from my window, about the people I had seen on my walks, about how the sunset seemed softer when the world felt too loud. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And in that small act of writing, I felt like I was claiming a piece of myself back. The first time I went to the grocery store, I kept my head down, terrified of seeing someone I knew, someone who might ask about Daniel or Lily or look at me with pity in their eyes. Sometimes I went to a quiet cafe, sitting in the corner where I could watch people come and go without feeling seen myself. Other times I walked to the park and just sat on a bench, breathing in the smell of grass and coffee drifting from the carts nearby. I still felt broken, but there were moments, just moments, when I felt almost normal. In those moments, I wasn't the woman whose fiancé left her for her best friend, I was just Julia, sitting in a park on a sunny afternoon. Every step felt heavy, like my body was moving through water. Two women were talking about betrayal, not the same as mine, but enough that I recognized the pain in their voices. For the first time, instead of turning away, I listened. I realized that betrayal wasn't something only I had faced. It didn't make my pain any smaller, but it made me feel less alone. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. I didn't want to be defined by what had happened to me. I wanted to be more than just the girl they hurt. But I did it because I knew if I didn't, I might stay trapped in that room forever. It was hard, my voice shaking as I spoke, my chest tight with fear that they might judge me or see me as weak. But each time I shared, the story felt a little lighter, as if speaking it aloud made it lose some of its power over me. My family listened quietly, my mother's eyes soft with sadness but also pride. She told me she had been waiting for the day I would talk, not because she needed to hear it, but because she knew I needed to let it out. And she was right. And strangely, it was in those quiet, awkward walks around my neighborhood that something inside me began to change. I started to notice things I had never paid attention to before, the small flower shop on the corner that opened at dawn. The old man who walked his dog every evening at the exact same time, the mother gently brushing hair from her daughter's face as they waited for the bus. These small glimpses of ordinary life reminded me that the world hadn't stopped, even if mine had. It hurt to see it, but it also pulled me forward, just enough to take another step the next day. Nights were still the hardest. I would lie awake, my heart pounding at memories that came without warning. Daniel's laughter, Lily's arm around my shoulder, the sound of Daniel whispering that he couldn't wait to marry me. Each memory felt like being cut open all over again, but slowly, they started to change. Instead of only seeing what I lost, I began to see what they had done. It wasn't just about love ending, it was about betrayal, about them choosing to hurt me rather than tell me the truth. That thought, painful as it was, helped me start letting go of the part of me that still blamed myself. It was their choice to betray me, not my mistake for loving them. Some nights I whispered those words to myself like a prayer, "It wasn't my fault." At first, it felt hollow, but over time, it felt a little more real. Then one morning, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in weeks and found my old notebook. As the days passed, I made myself leave the house more often. One day at the cafe, I overheard a conversation at the next table. Slowly, I began to share small pieces of what happened with people I trusted. Writing helped too. I wrote letters to Daniel and Lily, letters I never planned to send. As weeks turned into months, the pain didn't vanish, but it became something I could carry. I started to see my own reflection differently. I still didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long time, I felt the smallest spark of something I hadn't dared to hope for: determination. It was a gray, rainy morning when I truly made my choice. I remember standing by the window, watching the rain trail down the glass in thin, twisting lines, and thinking how easily something beautiful could become cold and heavy. It struck me how unchanged she looked, as if the months had left no mark on her at all. I wasn't ready to face her, not like this, not with so many raw edges still healing. The words felt heavy, like I was lifting stones one by one, but they came anyway. I still had bad moments, sudden memories that caught me off guard, or nights when loneliness felt like a weight pressing on my chest, but I didn't feel as lost in them anymore. I started to plan. Not for revenge in the loud, dramatic way people might imagine, but something slower, calmer. It was awkward at first, sending hesitant messages that began with, "I know it's been a while," but to my surprise, most of them replied warmly. They asked how I'd been, offered to meet for coffee, and listened when I shared, carefully at first, then more openly. The walls were bare, the floor scuffed from years of use, but when I stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It wasn't loud or overwhelming. It was soft and fragile, but it was there, beating gently in my chest. One afternoon, sitting across from a friend I hadn't seen in over a year, I found myself laughing, really laughing, not the forced kind that hides pain but a laugh that came from somewhere deep. For a moment, I almost felt guilty for being happy, but then I let it happen. It felt like breathing fresh air after months underground. And far more powerful, to rebuild my life so beautifully that their betrayal would mean nothing in the end. I wanted my work, my words, and my life itself to stand as proof that what they did had not ended me. And somewhere deep down, I knew that if they ever saw me again, I wanted them to see not the broken girl they left behind, but the woman who had risen from the ashes, stronger and more complete. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about proving to myself that they hadn't destroyed me. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I truly believed it. Was it truly strength or just another way to keep thinking about them? But each time doubt whispered in my ear, I wrote. And in my writing, I found the answer: this wasn't for them. It was for me. Every paragraph was a brick in the new foundation I was building, not to cover the scars, but to stand on them. I wrote about the day I found out, about Lily's guilty silence and Daniel's empty apologies. I wrote about the weeks of disbelief, the tears that felt endless, and the nights when I barely slept. But as I kept writing, something unexpected happened. My story began to change. Instead of ending with my heartbreak, it kept going, through the mornings when I forced myself out of bed, the moments when I noticed the world again, and the quiet strength that grew out of all the pain. By the time I put my pen down, my hands were shaking, but my heart felt strangely steady. For the first time, I could see my story not just as a tragedy, but as the beginning of something else. But standing there had done something important. It proved to me that I could be near her without falling apart. And that meant I could do more. On the walk home, the rain softened into a gentle drizzle. Because I couldn't even bear to think of it and use it for something new. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to start. I looked into renting a small studio space, somewhere I could write, work, and maybe even meet people who shared my love of art and stories. The idea felt terrifying and thrilling at the same time. For so long, everything had been about Daniel and Lily, what they did, what they took, how they made me feel. Now, for the first time, my thoughts were about me. What did I want? What could I build? The questions were heavy, but they were mine. And the city smelled of wet stone and fresh earth, like something quietly washing itself clean. That thought sparked a quiet anger in me, not a raging fire like before, but a steady flame that warmed rather than burned. For the first time, I didn't feel small when I looked at her. I didn't feel powerless. Instead, I felt strangely clear, as though all the confusion and heartbreak had finally settled into something sharp and simple. I had been betrayed, and I could either let that betrayal define me or use it to rebuild myself. That thought stayed with me as I got dressed and pulled on my coat, my hands trembling just a little, but my heart strangely calm. I didn't tell anyone where I was going that day. I just left the house, umbrella in hand, walking with quiet determination toward the part of town I had avoided since it all happened. My reflection stared back at me in every shop window I passed, hair damp from the mist, eyes still tired but holding something new, a silent promise that I would not stay broken forever. By the time I reached the street where Lily had opened her new little gallery, my chest felt tight and my fingers were ice cold, but I kept walking. I stopped across the road, standing under the dripping awning of a closed florist shop, and just watched for a while. Through the glass, I could see her moving about, arranging something on a small table. I didn't go in. I turned and walked away, and each step felt lighter than the one before. It wasn't time yet. That night, I sat at my small kitchen table with my notebook open, and for the first time, I began to write about them directly. In the following days, that sense of quiet purpose grew stronger. I decided to take the savings I had set aside for the wedding, money that had sat untouched. At the same time, I began to reach out to old friends I had drifted from during my relationship. Slowly, the outline of my plan became clearer. I didn't want to simply survive, I wanted to create something that would outshine everything they had taken from me. There were still days when I questioned myself. Was I being foolish? By the end of that month, I had signed the lease on a tiny, sunlit studio on a quiet street. That night, sitting on the floor of my new space with nothing but a notebook and a cup of tea, I whispered to myself, "This is the beginning." Moving into the studio felt like stepping into a quiet promise I had made to myself, a promise that life could be more than betrayal and heartbreak. It wasn't much, just 4 pale walls, an old wooden floor, and a small window that let in morning light, but it felt like mine in a way nothing else had for a long time. On the first day, I carried in my notebooks, a chipped mug, and a second-hand chair I had found at a thrift shop. I turned to see a woman about my age standing hesitantly in the doorway, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat. I pinned handwritten notes, short paragraphs, and even old photographs that had once brought me joy. Slowly, the space felt less like a bare room and more like a reflection of my journey, raw, imperfect, but undeniably alive. At first, it terrified me, the idea that strangers might judge my words, or worse, ignore them entirely. I sat there staring at the screen, tears welling in my eyes, because in that moment I realized that telling my story wasn't just healing me, it was helping others too. And maybe, I thought, that was the quiet power of truth, it reaches out beyond us, touching people we may never meet. And for the first time, I saw not just what I had lost, but what I had built. It wasn't finished, and neither was I, but it was enough to make me believe in my own resilience. And quietly, in that sunlit room, I whispered to myself, "This is just the beginning." But to my surprise, people responded. They left kind comments, sharing that my words felt honest, that they saw themselves in my story. Some nights, lying in bed, I would wonder if I was truly moving forward or just hiding behind words. But each morning, I returned to the studio, and each morning, I wrote. Over time, that act itself, showing up despite fear, became a kind of quiet victory. Reading their messages, I felt something warm and unfamiliar, connection. And as the days blended into weeks, my small studio, once empty and echoing, became a place of quiet strength. It was proof that even in the aftermath of betrayal, something new could take root, something real and honest and entirely mine. It reminded me that my pain wasn't just mine, it was part of something larger, a shared human experience of loss, hope, and rebuilding. I noticed how my writing changed too. It grew less focused on the betrayal and more on what came after, the quiet mornings, the laughter shared with old friends, and the gentle but stubborn hope that had taken root in my chest. It wasn't that the pain vanished, it simply became a part of the story rather than the whole of it. She introduced herself as Mia, an artist who rented the studio next door. Her voice was gentle, and there was a kindness in her eyes that made me feel unexpectedly safe. We talked awkwardly at first, about the building, the neighborhood, and the thin walls that let through every muffled sound of brushes and pencils, but soon our conversation grew easier, like water finding its path. When she left, she smiled and said, "If you ever want to talk or need anything, I'm right next door." That small gesture stayed with me long after she was gone. It reminded me that even when you feel completely alone, kindness can appear quietly, like sunlight slipping through a crack. Sitting there, alone in that empty space, I felt a strange mix of fear and excitement, as if my chest couldn't decide whether to tighten or open. I took a deep breath, ran my fingers over the scratched surface of the desk. The studio felt peaceful in that fading light, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to think about Daniel and Lily without feeling like my heart would break apart. I wondered if they ever thought of me, if they ever regretted what they did. But instead of anger, what I felt most was distance, as if they belonged to a chapter one had finished reading, a story I had outgrown. That realization surprised me, and in a quiet way, it freed me. They had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. And reminded myself why I was doing this, not to erase what happened, but to build something new from it. That thought gave me courage as I unpacked my things, each small object a piece of my story that had survived the storm. In those first days, my routine slowly formed around quiet mornings and long afternoons of writing. I would walk to the studio through side streets lined with trees, feeling the change of seasons and the crispness of the air. At first, the words came slowly, each sentence heavy with memory. But over time, they began to flow more freely, shaped by a voice that felt honest and real, my own. I wrote about the past, but also about the future I wanted, a life built on quiet strength rather than fear. Some days, the memories hurt so much it felt like pressing on a fresh bruise, but I kept going, reminding myself that writing wasn't just about telling a story, it was about reclaiming it. Sometimes, on the way, I'd catch glimpses of other people going about their lives, a woman walking her dog, an elderly man sitting on a bench reading the newspaper, a young couple laughing softly as they crossed the road. These simple scenes reminded me that pain, no matter how deep, didn't stop the world from turning. And somehow, that was comforting. It meant that life kept moving, and so could I. Inside the studio, I let my thoughts spill onto the page. One afternoon, as I sat writing by the window, a small knock startled me. As the weeks passed, I began to fill the empty walls of my studio with pieces of my story. One evening, I stayed late, the city outside growing soft and golden as the sun set. During those days, I also began to share small pieces of my writing online, under a name that wasn't my own. One morning, I received a message from someone who had read my words and simply wrote, "Thank you. You helped me feel less alone." Despite this progress, there were still moments of doubt. I never forgot why I had started, not to erase what happened, but to make it mean something more. By the end of that month, I stood in my studio, looking at the wall covered in notes, drafts, and memories. The day I finished my story felt nothing like I had imagined. There was no grand moment, no burst of applause, no sense of triumph echoing off the walls of my little studio. I passed familiar storefronts and empty benches, the breeze cool against my face. I thought about everything that had brought me here, every tear I'd cried, every word I'd written, every silent morning spent searching for strength I wasn't sure I had. And as I sat there, I realized that strength had always been there, buried under disappointment and betrayal. We sat together on the floor of my studio, surrounded by scattered pages and scribbled notes. I told her the whole story, not just the parts one had written, but the moments of fear and shame I had kept hidden, even from myself. She still had the same tired eyes and the same scars, but there was something softer around her mouth, something steadier in the way she held her shoulders. I whispered to my reflection, "You made it," and the words didn't feel hollow this time. They felt true, even if my voice trembled as I said them. Daniel and Lily are still out there somewhere, living lives I no longer watch from the shadows. I don't know if they regret what they did, and maybe I never will. But the truth is, it doesn't matter anymore. My story isn't about them, it's about me, about the choice I made to keep going, to rebuild from nothing, and to find peace in the simple act of telling the truth. And she listened, really listened, without judgment or pity. It isn't loud or showy, it has the kind of pride that sits softly in your chest and makes you stand a little taller. And as I close my notebook, I understand something I couldn't see before. The greatest revenge was never about hurting them back. It was about finding my voice, using it to heal, and building a life so full and honest that they no longer had any place in it. That, finally, is my ending, and it's exactly where I'm meant to be. When I finally fell silent, she simply said, "I'm glad you told it. It matters." It was from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years, someone who had seen my story online. She wrote to say she had gone through something similar and thanked me for giving her the words she couldn't find on her own. Reading her message, tears filled my eyes because, in helping myself, I had unknowingly helped someone else. That, more than anything, felt like the true meaning of all the pain I had endured. Her words sank deep into my heart, because in that moment, I truly believed them. My story did matter, not because it was dramatic or shocking, but because it was mine. And telling it had changed me. It had been waiting for me to remember who I was before they tried to decide it for me. I spent more time outside, walking through parks and sitting quietly in small cafes, simply watching the world around me. It felt like learning to breathe again after holding my breath for too long. When the copies arrived, I sat cross-legged on my studio floor and turned the pages slowly. I thought about everything it represented, the pain, the loss, but also the courage to face it all without turning away. Holding those pages felt like holding proof that healing isn't about forgetting, it's about transforming what hurt you into something that can't hurt you anymore. And with each new day, I felt a little lighter, as though my story had lifted some of the weight I'd been carrying. For the first time in so long, I noticed how calm my thoughts had become. It was as though my mind had finally stopped arguing with itself, no longer trapped in an endless loop of anger and hurt. I still remembered what Daniel and Lily had done, but it felt like looking at an old photograph, distant, a part of the past that couldn't touch me anymore. And it struck me, quietly, that forgiveness doesn't always have to mean welcoming someone back into your life. Sometimes it simply means loosening your grip on the pain they caused, so you can move forward. Instead, there was just me, sitting alone in my chair with my notebook open in front of me, staring at the last line I had written. For a long while, I simply sat there, my hand resting lightly on the page, feeling the weight of it all. It wasn't polished or perfect, it was raw and sometimes messy, but it was real. And to my surprise, people listened. They left comments telling me their own stories, how they had been hurt and how they were trying to heal. Each message felt like a hand reaching out in the dark, reminding me that none of us truly suffer alone. I read every word, my heart tightening with both sadness and hope. Because in those words, I saw the same longing for release, the same quiet bravery it takes to keep going. It wasn't only words I had put down, it was months of quiet struggle, of confronting my own pain and letting it speak without running from it. I could feel my heart beating a little faster, not out of fear this time, but from the strange, gentle relief that comes when you realize you have truly let something go. That night, as I walked home, the city felt softer, almost as if the lights were glowing just for me. When I reached my apartment, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the lights of passing cars flicker on the ceiling. In the days that followed, I shared my story online, piece by piece. One evening, Mia knocked on my door with 2 cups of coffee in hand. Slowly, life began to feel wider again, as if doors I hadn't noticed before were starting to open. One morning, I stood before the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. I decided to print my story, not to sell it or send it to anyone important, but to hold it in my own hands. Not long after, I received an email that made me pause. As I look back now, I realize the betrayal that once seemed to define me has become just a part of my larger story. Sitting here tonight, in the quiet of my studio, I run my fingers over the cover of my story and feel a quiet pride.